miracle! It's a miracle!" Before I could say a word, she ran out to tell the other nurses. In no time, the room was filled with nurses come to see the great miracle awakening. "It's not a miracle," I protested. "I just yelled, 'Wake up!'" But the charge nurse wouldn't believe me. "I was right behind you, Dr. Fox. I would have heard you yell. You did something to bring her out of that coma." She didn't take into account the soundproof door. Nothing I said dissuaded her from telling the others that I performed the impossible by bringing the elderly woman out of a coma in just an instant. Needless to say, I jumped from number 8 right to number 1 on the internal medicine specialist list. The nurses insisted that I be called whenever a difficult case presented itself. Several days passed before I discovered what had happened to the woman I'd cured. Elderly and very hard of hearing, she had felt suddenly dizzy, so she laid down in bed and closed her eyes. Just then her daughter walked in and, thinking her mother was dead or dying, called for help. Soon, the old woman was in the emergency room, where needles were stuck into her spine and arms. She was probed, blood was taken out of her, medicines were injected in. There were bright lights, people running about and shouting orders. Terribly frightened by all this commotion and not understanding what was happening, the poor woman suffered a reaction in which her mental distress was converted into the physical symptoms of a coma. The more that was done to her, the more frightened she became. And so she stayed in that state until I came along and, figuring it couldn't hurt, yelled, "Wake up!" into her ear. Years later, an international jet-setter, who was also my patient, lay unconscious in a hospital near downtown Los Angeles. He had suffered a stroke following surgery. The doctor said he would be paralyzed on his right side. At the request of his family, I went to the intensive care unit to see him. It was night, the hospital was quiet, and I was alone in the room with the comatose man. Could it work twice, I wondered? I leaned over and yelled, "Wake up!" into his ear. He didn't jump out of bed, but he did move his arms and legs, all of them. That told me he wasn't paralyzed, as the doctors had feared. I knew he was going to get better. I went back to the waiting room where his very large family was gathered. They were immensely relieved when I told them that I felt he would be all right. I stayed with them until 2 in the morning, telling them stories of patients, including the one about the elderly woman who woke from her coma. I told them about my patients who got over their illnesses once they changed their beliefs. Once they got rid of their hatreds and other negative feelings. Once they began to believe in themselves. Yes, the family agreed. They knew people like that. They believed a strong spirit was vital for health, but were surprised that a medical doctor would say so too. Finally, the jet-setter's daughter said, "It's great to hear these inspirational stories from a doctor. Why don't you put them all in a book?" "What shall I call it?" I asked. Without hesitating, she answered, "Wake up! Wake up! You're alive," said another relative. This book is a look at the power of the human mind and spirit, as seen through the eyes of a physician. The case histories and stories in this book illustrate the relationship between your thoughts, beliefs, health, and disease, and the lessons that are to be learned. Your mind and spirit are very powerful. You, and only you, determine whether they will be a strong medicine or a terrible scourge. I hope that reading about people who have used their inborn powers to overcome disease, adversity, poverty, and other handicaps will inspire you to make the most out of your own life. Most of us are not in a coma like the elderly lady, but neither are we fully awake and enjoying life. We're puzzled and frightened. We feel the ground slipping out from under our feet as values, morals, and ethics change. We shudder to see traditional support groups melt away. We suffer the effects of personal and economic woes. From my experience as a medical doctor, I can tell you that your health absolutely depends upon your having a